Okay, we're all set to go with the next recording, so you can start whenever you're ready.
All right. Trying to get the.
No.
Well, that looks like you must be casting. Yeah, you're casting.
Okay, I
You're
got
good.
it finally.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can hear us, and you've got the content coming over there. Okay, good. All right.
Okay, I need to go back to the beginning. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So, take it away, Claire.
Okay. Well, I've been asked to talk about using WordPress for discussion on in a class, student discussion, commentary, whether it's on. And I've been using this for virtual classes, where there's a very small amount of face-to-face contact with students. But I've also been using it in hybrid classes as well, where there's a mixture of face-to-face contact and online. And I've been using the WordPress in a couple of different ways. Recently, I've just been using it for discussion on a class that I'm otherwise teaching as a virtual class. I'm using it in preference to the Blackboard area for discussions, because I found that seemed to me to be kind of old-fashioned. I found it was visually not particularly engaging, and it was also confusing. And I'm certainly by no means the most technically literate person around here, but I'm actually in the situation of the class right now. I'm more technically literate than most of my students, who are quite a bit younger. So, I found it confusing. I figured students would too. So anyway, what you're seeing here is the opening screen of the using the WordPress site this semester for speech, thought, and culture. And one thing that I like is the fact that I can use images and make it a much more inviting place for students to participate. So the advantages, very briefly, as I just pointed out, you can work on the visual content, so it isn't just simply text-based, which, certainly can work, but I think there's all kinds of ways in which you can do things with images, which I think can definitely help learning. Another thing that I think is important is that when students are having to learn so much that's new content, new classes, new classrooms, this and that, I think it's helpful to actually make use of a format that they may already have familiarity with. And a lot of them have spent time online, on blogs, reading blogs, making comments on blogs. So this gives them a format that doesn't require them to have to develop any more skills on top of what they already have to. The other thing is I just find it easier to follow the sequence of comments and replies, where I can then put in a comment and then sort of further propel the conversation. And I've been quite pleased with how students actually engage each other in this kind of forum. Now, there are some disadvantages right now that it isn't seamlessly integrated with the other online resources, so it is one more step that students have to take to do something, and I wish that weren't the case. And at the moment, if students want to post anything, I haven't even pursued that. Anything that they have posted, they've had to send to me, and then I post it. But trying to make a little bit more of a kind of free-flowing forum, marketplace of ideas would be kind of fun. And it's been getting kind of a lot of spam comments come in with people making all kinds of weird comments. But those for the moment to me are far outweighed by the advantages. So then I just want to then show you, I think the best thing is for me to show you how it's actually been working in my class. So this is what you see when you go to the screen of my current class. And so this is the most recent post. What I've been doing in this class is that I've been adding a post every week that goes with the lecture material, but develops it in a particular direction, either because I pick up something that's been going on in contemporary culture. The class, incidentally, is about speech, so it's something to do with language that's going on at the moment, so they can refer to their own knowledge of what's going on in the news. Or I sort of link it to, because this is an anthropology class, I link it to some ideas that relate to the topic as they develop in other cultures. So this particular entry was all about performance and oral artistry. So here I was getting them to think about what are the situations where people still exhibit some ability to be able to use some particular oral performance, whether it's something as trivial as singing happy birthday to whether it's actually going and reciting a piece of poetry at an open mic night, that kind of thing. I can see here I've already got 9 replies from the students, so let's see what they've said. Now, I'm showing this as it seems to you. If I am logged in, actually I might be logged in, what will happen is that then I have the ability to comment as the administrator of the site and not just as some other random commentator. But here we see somebody's kind of weighed in with a comment, a lengthy comment, and it's nice because they frequently, I do find that people will really express their ideas at some length, is that they won't just, even though I am in a way kind of monitoring. I've said in this class they've got to make at least 10 contributions to the blog, and I say that counts even if you make 10 comments on one particular blog, that only is going to count as one. And I tell them that you can't just like write one sentence, but in general they very easily do more than just sort of give one sentence. So here you have somebody's made the comment, and then here the students come in and responded to what the other student says. Then there's another response from the student back. Then we get another comment, and they actually engage each other quite a lot. Here's another one, but this is very typical of the sort of length of comments that the students make. So I'm quite pleased with how much I get in terms of feedback and commentary and them sort of expressing or sort of contributing. And they frequently contribute ideas from their own experience or from other things that they know. Now, I can then go back every week to all of my previous comments. Last week I was talking about pragmatics in speech, which is, I got them to think about an exercise of when we use certain kinds of terms of address, like when do you use first name addressed to somebody, when do you use title last name, what we think that means. But then the most important point of the lesson was to think about when we break those rules to some deliberate effect. Usually I get the same student, always likes to be, it's kind of like in blogs, number one.
First.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's the number one, but he's, he goes on
waiting
something.
for it.
Yeah, that's right. He's always waiting for it. And here he's added something else. And then this is me. I've been named Anth Facco, thanks to Michael.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I don't know. But then I can then add in my comments so that, and I don't like to comment on everything. I mean, it's difficult because I don't want to not comment and make people feel that what they said I don't think is important enough to respond to. But I don't want to be in there the whole time because then I'll hog the conversation. So, you kind of have to get a sense of how much you want to weigh in and sometimes I use the opportunity to introduce some new piece of terminology. So it's really good also that if something didn't actually get into the lecture and I want to, and something a student says gives me a chance to insert it, I can bring it up at that point. So I want to see if there's another example of where I brought up something that was currently in the news, because that's a nice Well, actually, I also learned through doing these, I was finding all these things about mixed languages, which was kind of cool. Oh yeah, well, this was sort of interesting, talking about language change and talking about coining new words. So here I could talk about SCOTUS and POTUS and FLOTUS, which is very appropriate for you, Carolyn, and how, you know, that's now become something people can talk about, FLOTUS and POTUS, and it's actually sort of become a new word, and how these things go about. So, but I really like the idea that rather than just talking about it, I can bring in a picture of it. So that immediately gives a visual reference point that I think helps make the point. And then finally, I want to show something else that I was doing in a class. It was actually a face-to-face class, but I was then using as, I was also using as a discussion forum. But I also got students to then, we were experimenting, Michael and myself, with a number of different ways in which students could actually use some kind of authoring experience online. We tried a wiki at one time, but then you ended up with 3 places to go. You had, at that point, you still had Angel, and then you had the WordPress, and then you had the wiki. And it was like, this is insane, you know, it's just too much. So then I tried to streamline it a bit by getting them to essentially write it as a blog, and then they could send it to me formatted, and then I just basically had to bring it into the blog. But ideally, I would have liked them to actually post it. That would have been ideal. But these were kind of interesting because these are examples of what they came up with when they were both working with text and with image. And in this particular class, it's Arts and Media in Global Perspective. So it is a class that very much depends upon looking at art and artifacts and performance in different parts of the world. So it lends itself to a very visual presentation. So what was nice here was to get students to think about how does an image, you know, what does an image do? It isn't just illustrating something, but how does it educate, how does it help inform the person looking at the post? So some people did better jobs than others. Something I found interesting with the text is, in general, the text, because again this was a format that they're familiar with but outside of an academic context, I've generally found that the writing's been better because it doesn't get overlain with this idea that it's got to be academic and whatever. So, you know, you have a set of slightly different challenges with things like citation. I mean, they still do need to cite, obviously, but you know, the writing is better, but then you've got to try and figure out how do you manage this, in a sense, a kind of a blended style of writing. But it has been gratifying to find that people really, they write in a much more accessible way. I didn't actually end up doing it the last time I offered the class because, as I said, with me having to do the work of putting everything up, I feel that an important part of the experience of the students would actually be doing it themselves. So I need to re-enter the conversation with how to do this. So I'm just scrolling through this. I know I'm probably not, this is not very helpful, but let me see if I can, I'm trying to find, there are a few, as I said, which are a lot better than others. Yeah, let's see. Oh, this was sort of interesting. This was when somebody was comparing the animation versions of narratives with storytelling and other modalities, either because of a book that you read or a tale that's told. So she was looking at the comparison between Tangled and the story of Rapunzel. Then she went into Studio Ghibli, which is a famous Japanese animation studio, and how they dealt with the animation of folk tales. And so she was comparing the different ways in which, you know, they managed the storytelling through different kinds of visual treatments. The students were coming up with some things that were really great to look at and very instructive to look at. It's the sort of thing which, simply being described in text, you would not have been able to get the same understanding. but also to be able to explain something using both text and images. So that's what I have to say about that.
So I have a question. I'm sure
Yeah.
the other sites will have a question too. But what do you think it is about the? What do you think it is about the format that? I mean, the quality of the student work you're getting is obviously generally above what you see in a forum, like a Blackboard forum, something like that. What do you think it is about the WordPress format that makes that quality better? Is it mostly, like you say, that they understand what a blog post is and they understand what a comment is, and so they can kind of mimic that, or is it what do you?
I think it's a couple of things. I think first of all, it is that it's a format that they are familiar with, they've seen before, and they know how it works. Not all of them do, but I would say the vast majority know what that's like. I think also what it does is that it's able to tap in certain kinds of notions of professionalism that can be turned to the idea of quality.
Okay.
Again, it doesn't work on everybody. Some people will still manage to do something that's kind of grim and not very good. Yeah. But the overall standard becomes much better, because I think when they're doing something like this, it's almost like it's easier for them to imagine somebody else seeing it.
Right.
Whereas if they write a term paper, I'm going to see it as the instructor, but nobody else is going to see it.
Right.
And so they don't have the same investment in it as something which has to look a certain way, or other people are going to think it looks terrible. Yeah. And not only do these done in such a way that the other students can see them. Now, you also have times when people share each other's work, they can see each other's work, but here it is like it's on the computer, and so, right. And so although I reassure them that this is not open for everybody, well, of course we're getting these spam comments, so some spam bot seeing it somewhere. But in general, it's not out there for some expert to come in and say what you're saying is nonsense. So, it's like a little private sandlot, so they can feel safe. Yeah. But on the other hand, I think they feel that now I'm seeing what something looks like, and I don't want it to look awful. I want it to meet a certain standard. So I think one is able to access that way of thinking about their work, which I think is very helpful.
I have more questions, but I'm going to let other people from other sites ask if they have any. Or
here. I have a question. Can you tell if somebody is replying? Is it sort of within the same frame as opposed to creating their own new comment?
Well, the thing is that what's going on here is that very much I have to be the initiator, is that they can't initiate, which is one of the disadvantages.
Okay, gotcha.
And I want to be able to have more flexibility so that they have more.
So you have to you can't just quickly visually see, oh, this is an original new post versus they're replying to something.
That's true. But on the other hand, with Blackboard, I would sometimes find it confusing, and I couldn't always follow the sequence of when something was new and in a response, and the whole comment area is divided in a way that I just found very counterintuitive. So ideally what I would like is that I've got to find some way, again, to try and balance this, is that I want the students to have more ability to participate in here. I'd still like to, as with any kind of blog owner, to be able to exercise certain kinds of editorial powers. But I think that I would like to be able for the students to be able to initiate more comments and add in more things and have a little bit more agency in that sense.
I think we can get that done. I think there is a role of just author, which allows you to be the editor, right? So nothing gets published until you Questions out there? Everybody flagging at 2:30. I have another question, which is, what's your sense of the? Some people worry that when students get into blogs and any type of multimedia, they get so focused on the graphics that they're using to express themselves that they don't pay enough attention to what's considered to be the more academic piece of what they're doing. And have you found that, or have you needed to give students guidance on that, or?
Well, I do say that they need to cite things, but of course what you also have the ability in a blog is that you have hypertext.
Yeah.
So instead of even citing, you can shoot somebody off somewhere. Yep. And I always like to try and finesse things a little bit with student writing, because I think we can sometimes get in the trap of getting them so focused on things like citation that we're actually forgetting, can they actually put together coherent paragraph. Right. And another thing sometimes I find about this kind of format is that it's not that I'm saying that citation isn't important, but I'm also trying to kind of loosen that up a little bit, so that they do cite, but they're not having to cite every 2 seconds, because of course a blog that's going to have that. I mean, there are some academic essays which do work like that. Yeah. But here I'm trying to get them to think more about a blog, and how does a blog? I mean, people still can't just put things in a blog and not give citations, but either you footnote it, you have some sort of footnote format, or you hypertext or something. There's different ways to do that. So certainly that's important, but I work with it that way. The other thing is that I think what I'm trying to say is that what I'm trying to get them to think about is that they can, yes, I can see they can get too much into the graphics, but we also don't want to fall into an academic trap, particularly perhaps in the social science and humanities. I think this is less of a problem in the sciences, where they do posters and they're very visual anyway, that we downplay what we do with images. And I think the thing then is to get the students to think about, well, yes, you've got to have a certain quality of image, but what is your image doing? It can't just be there because it looks nice. It's got to do some work. Right. It's got to actually propel the argument. It's got to do something that the text doesn't, So I think it addresses some concerns. I think it's very hard to find any given an assignment that does all the things we want. If I want people to really work on sort of academic type citation, I'm not sure that this would perhaps be the best avenue to do it, but it allows me to get students to think about other kinds of things. So.
Any other questions? No? Any other questions out there? No. All right. Thank you. Okay. I can show what hypothesis is, and then
I've got hypothesis.
Yeah. Oh, you do. Oh, you do. Okay.
I do.
You show it then.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is improvised. Carolyn didn't realize that she probably wanted to demonstrate hypothesis before she talked about it. So Claire is going to just show what hypothesis is before Carolyn tells us how she taught with it.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I pull up a something to annotate, and I assume this is kind of how you did it. Is that the key seems to be, because one thing I found that anything that you actually, at least in my experience, anything that you have on Blackboard you couldn't use the bookmarklet or the applet on it. You had to host it somewhere else or whatever. Anyway, so what I was doing for the student, because the other thing is that I can, for myself, pull up a document that's a PDF, because it's all PDFs. I can pull it from my own computer and annotate it, but if you want it to be visible to a set of students, you've got to actually you've got to have the PDF somewhere on a website that they have access to. So what I was doing is
so let's back up steps though.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just show you what it looks like. I'm sorry. I kind of got distracted because I'm suddenly remembering this little glitch.
We're going to demonstrate an annotation tool. It's in some ways it's like perusal.
Sorry, it's just taking...
But
okay. All right. So sorry.
No.
Anyway, okay. So you basically have.
Is it like a website? Can you tell us the website?
What it is you basically download a bookmarklet. If if you're using
Firefox
and it's called something else. If it's
The Chrome extension.
Chrome extension. I don't know if they work on other.
I think the bookmarklet works everywhere, but the extension only works on Chrome.
Okay, all right. So anyway, this you can see up here. This is what I use because I use Chrome. So I don't know if you can sort of see my cursor waving around this very small screen. But anyway, once you get your PDF up in the browser, you click here, and then what will happen, so let's just, is that you will then see this sort of set of interactive objects. Click on this arrow here, and what I did with the class I was doing, I don't know what you did, Carolyn, is that you have an option that your comments can be public, in which case anybody who wants to look at your comments through Hypothesis will see it. What you can set up your own group, which is just going to be you and your students. And then what you have is you have your PDF, and then what you go through is, if it's a comment that you want to make as the instructor, you simply move your cursor over, and what will happen is it'll give you an option to either highlight a piece of the text or annotate. So if you click on annotate, it'll then open up a screen here, and then you can put in your comment. So, whoops. Okay, whatever it happens to be, there are some text tools here. And then you post to the class, and then that comment will go up and will be visible to the other students. But the point is that all the students have to be, they have to be able to sign up with the Hypothesis as the service, and then they all have to have access to the 510, to the particular class. Once you get that going, so there's a little bit of work getting it going. Once you get going, it's fantastic. If you can see on the right-hand side, you can see this is me, but then this is a student comment. Here's another student comment. So they can then take out a piece of text, write an annotation, and I can reply to that. Another student can reply to that. So you have all kinds of ways in which you can then respond to their comments.
And the neat thing is you can do it anywhere on the web, right? So you're not limited to, well, only documents that are in this place, or only this type of documents. If it's a web page, if it's a PDF, you can do it.
Things like JSTOR, I think.
They actually built the groups functionality for Carolyn. So
they did.
Yeah.
Oh, fabulous. So
you were
the original expert.
You were being so problematic.
Anyway, so now you've seen it. I will have to sit here.
Yeah, that's the hot seat.
So I think when you see when you hear what I'm going to talk about, the fact that I didn't do the presentation will become evident to you. I think when Michael was thinking about the workshops and what we could offer, in the back of his mind, he was wondering who is the least technically astute person that he knows on the planet. And he naturally turned to me. I think I had a flip phone up until a few months ago, and I don't go on the Facebook, I don't tweet, I don't write on blogs, and part of it is because of the technical difficulties that I heard you faced earlier today, but the other is I'm sort of lazy about sort of learning technology, and I'll be candid about that. I'm like a 105-year-old woman when it comes to using tools that are available, and so I was just thinking that the people who would be participating in the workshop would want to learn more about what tools are available, and I thought that a population might be people who looked like me, who were really apprehensive about using technology in classes. So my personal journey, I thought, would illustrate that it can be done with people who are just south of, what do we say, John McCain in terms of their aptitude and skill for this. And I don't say that proudly. I say that embarrassingly as an embarrassed person, but also because I teach in a real traditional way, and so I hadn't seen the utility of it. So that's who Mike had in mind, I think, when he asked me to talk a little bit about that. But I want to talk about why I changed my perspective and then why I welcomed hypothesis given my limitations as somebody who's concerned about technology. I realized that it was affecting how the students were learning, and that a lot of the students are much more tech savvy than some of us older faculty members are. And so I think they have an expectation that we utilize the web and that we utilize platforms like Hypothesis because they're being exposed to it early on in their schooling, and they're seeing it in other classes. So seeing how my students learn and seeing how they were attracted to a different style that I'm accustomed to sort of has shamed me into learning a little bit about this, although not nearly as much as I probably should, probably to the concern of Michael. So I was introduced to Hypothesis, I think it was 2 years ago, by Mike, when I was looking for some way to have students do note-taking and annotations that could be easily shared by the group. We first started with a wiki page, I think it was. I think it was 2 years before that, so 4 years ago. And that served its purpose, but I think it had some limitations. And then he told me about Hypothesis, and I didn't know that they had done the group function around the class, but he said that is something I could experiment with and that it was probably really user-friendly. And it is, because the way I learned it and the way Claire, I think, explained it is how I think all of us read or used to read before the World Wide Web, which is taking notes in the margins of books, circling things, or using the highlighter to capture points that are ones that we want to elaborate on. And so for those who are accustomed to doing that, it really is, as you can see from the example, very user-friendly, because it really is doing the same function but on the web, and what it can be done with is enormous. I used it on articles that were in PDF form. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you can also use Hypothesis to make notes or annotations on anything that's on the web. And so it really can be used in a much more expansive way than I did. So it is basically, I took some notes here, a platform for discussion on the web. It uses annotation as a tool to enable sentence-level critique for note-taking on top of news, blogs, articles, proposed pieces of legislation, more recently, ebooks. So its application could be in a variety of different ways. And you can use it in a formal way or an informal way. So how you use Hypothesis is dependent upon what you want to do. And one of the things that I found is that using it formally does encourage better annotations on the part of students, much like WordPress, which is what Claire mentioned, because it is visible to others. And I think that when you know that your work is being scrutinized by peers in the class, you pay a little bit more attention to it. And so that's really exciting. And it also allows for this collaboration, and you can see from the example on the screen that it allows for an exchange between you, the instructor, and the students, or between the students themselves, and it's pretty easy to follow, and that's intriguing as well, because it really is an exchange of ideas that I think we really get good conversations outside of the actual classroom setting. So that is. That was intriguing to me, and it's a lot better than people writing comments on a blog, which I think get really uncivil very quickly, and I don't think really adds to the accumulation of knowledge or anything like that. One of the things I mentioned about Hypothesis is how user-friendly it is, and in fact, they have tips for instructors and tips for students that are available on the web. They are very receptive to Luddites like myself, asking them how to download Chrome multiple times. And so I don't know if they've changed now that they're a little bit larger, but I like that as well. So just one of the things that I pulled from Hypothesis, assuming that some folks had not been exposed to it, were ways in which you might be able to annotate with students. And so I just want to throw a few out and then conclude with how I used it. So one of the things that you could do as an instructor is you could take the text and you can pre-populate the text with things like a question mark. So you can highlight something and then ask a question to students off to the side. So it sort of draws their attention to a part of the text that you might find interesting or inspiring, or something that may need more elaboration. So it prompts the discussion, because you could just, again, like writing in a book, you just put a question mark there and highlight something, and it sort of draws the eye. So as an instructor, you can use it to help them actually learn to read in a more, I guess, effective way. And then if you are accompanying the annotations with the classroom discussion, that could be a starting point for the later classroom discussion. The other thing that can be done is students can use it as I've described it, which is to highlight things, to tag things, to help them sort of condense their reading if they're going through it multiple times. And then as an instructor, if you're seeing what's happening in terms of their annotations or their highlighting, it can really be a way that you can zero in as an instructor on what got their attention. So it can prompt you to be more responsive to what the students are doing. One of the things that it also helps students do is learn to be what we call close readers, or better readers of text, because if students are going in there and they're reading something and they're learning that by highlighting it, they're able to comprehend it better because they're focusing on certain passages, I think it encourages them to be better readers, and I think that's obviously key to knowledge. You can use annotation to provide an opinion, which is what I think is happening here with Claire's example. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I like about it is the opinion is not like a comment section on a blog, but it's one that is viewed by multiple people, so it sort of forces them to have an opinion that is more grounded in evidence, and one that they will have to defend if you have an exchange of ideas. And one of the things that is interesting also is people are annotating here, like Claire, with just text. You can also annotate and use multimedia. You can put images, and you can link to other things similar to WordPress. And so I'm told that students are visual learners, and so if they, in certain classes, it may be more suited, but that might be a way in which they can be really creative in annotating. And we're not talking about emojis, but actual, images or videos that are useful. And then finally, I'll end with what I used it for, which is I used it as an annotated bibliography of the articles that I had assigned for class. So I was teaching a graduate class in public policy, and what I needed was for the students to engage in research for their major research paper. And I wanted them to be able to exchange the research with one another, because they were group projects. And so for my class, we had them not do it as public annotations, but as group annotations. So a student would go into an article, would do the highlighting and the tagging, but would accompany that by a fairly lengthy 250, maybe 400 word annotation of what the article was about. So they essentially summarize the article, but they also linked back to things like that, their own highlights, in order to call other students' attention to the documents. And then they exchanged that. And that served two purposes. One was it helped them, I think, again, learn to read critically and to exchange ideas publicly, but it also allowed them to do their research for the paper. So they didn't see it as a chore, but they saw it as a starting point for writing the eventual research paper. So it was really quite useful for that purpose. And so I used it in a very limited way, but I really liked it. Some of the advantages are the exchange, again, with one another as far as students and the sharing of ideas. The wisdom of the crowd, I think that you get that with Hypothesis because you're seeing this exchange in real time. I think that's important. I think it's fairly easy to use, as I said, for someone like me. It was a nice way to start down this line of teaching. Some disadvantages, I wasn't joking about the Chrome extension. We had problems 2 years ago, but Jeremy was able to walk me through it, and to the amusing point where he essentially showed arrows on what students had to click, and I had to click in order to download it. And so that was really helpful. And for the groups, sometimes they had problems finding one another's work, and that just came with practice. So I'll end by saying that was one of the challenges for me for today, is I haven't been doing it or reading it for my students for 2 years. And so because I used it for such a targeted purpose, I had to remind myself what hypothesis was, and and the fact that I should use it more frequently. So I think that for someone like me, it's something that has to be done often in order to have me up to speed. And so I'll end there.
Any questions?
I found that, one problem is, I suppose this gets into fair use and stuff like that, but sometimes I would have an excerpt from a book, and then, you can't actually annotate that in the same way. You just have to say something, a page this or that. And that was frustrating, because sometimes you want to be able to use book excerpts, but unless it's an e-book which the library accesses or somebody, you're stuck.
Yeah, and in fact, I think the hypothesis, I did an ebooks initiative just recently. Yeah,
just recently, but yeah.
Yeah, and because that was an issue, and I was excited to see that. But even then, it is limited. But but I think it's heavily the big advantage of being able to annotate anything sort of on the web.
Right.
Shows.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, still, and we worked around it.
Yeah.
So. I mean, what sort of difference did you find in terms of the kind of work you got? Did you see a big improvement?
I did, which was surprising to me, because I'm known, even though I'm a Luddite, and I told you all the bad things about myself, I'm known as a really strict instructor, and I write all over their papers in a way that's maddening, I think, for them. But I actually found that when they were under the scrutiny of their peers, they actually, I think, paid better attention to some of their work, and so I thought that was interesting. And I did tell them ahead of time that to treat this as, not a comment section on a blog, that this is something that I'd like to be more formal for purposes of the class. So I pre-warned them, but I was really happy with the results. And in fact, the differences with hypothesis compared to the wiki were significant. And so that's why I liked it.
Yeah.
So a question here from everyone. Is this like a toolbar extension for Chrome, and you said Firefox has one as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Toolbar extension in Chrome, and in Firefox it's a bookmarklet, but it works in a similar way.
Okay, so it's already on our machines, huh?
I mean,
If you have it,
you have to download it, but it's it takes most people about 10 seconds.
Mike's looking at me because he knows that you have to quadruple.
You have to make it.
That's true. You do have to set up an account so that all your annotations can be attributed.
Yeah, but one of the things that's nice, again, for people like me, is that if you go to the hypothesis site, they sort of, I think, again, they anticipate me, because they take you step by step how to do it, and so that's where that user friendliness, I think, is so nice.
Yeah, there's actually a set of slides here about how to get extension. Extension.
And I think that's what he sent me.
Clicky.
Yeah, I think he sent it to me.
Great, thank you.
Hypothesis is hiring, by the way.
Hypothesis, they will not be interested in me, I think.
I was going to say, for usability.
Yeah, they must be.
I just have a question in Spokane, just a quick nuts and bolts. So let's say you're annotating a web page. Where does that document go? How do the students get to it? Does that go onto your Blackboard, or is it a link you email them, or how does that work?
So for there are two options right at the beginning. Claire showed it, where you could, your annotation could go to a group that you've set up. So I set up a separate group for my class. So it was like Poli-Sci 514. Or you can make it open to the public so that I think everybody can see it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there's two routes, right? One is the oldest route they support is you just go to the web page, and then you look to see the annotations on the web page. You can see whatever the annotations were by going to the web page that's annotated. The newer one is they have something that's more like a feed, like you see in Facebook, of what are the recent comments that were made by your group, and so you can just go to that feed and see the recent comments, and then if you want to go and see the original web page, you can click that.
So it's through your account. It's through your
But
hypothesis.
it's through your hypothesis account, yeah.
I found that when I was, as I said, I was beginning to go off on a tangent, but that was a real problem, was that when I had the PDFs hosted on Blackboard, we couldn't actually, even when we brought them up and then tried to go to hypothesis, I can't remember what happened, but it just didn't work. So I ended up having to host it on the anthropology webpage.
Yeah.
So I don't know what was going on.
So the way that Blackboard is structured, it doesn't let third party
That's
things
what I figured it was.
see the stuff inside its frame, and that there's good security reasons for that mostly, but I mean for that sort of thing it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that's what's going on. You can certainly put it somewhere else and link to it. And I know in Canvas, and they've worked with Canvas directly to make sure that there is an integration now, and maybe eventually they'll get the Blackboard integration done too.
Okay.
I think the Canvas thing, just going on their website, is fairly recent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do we have access to Canvas here?
Oh no.
No.
I'm just saying eventually I think they'll get to Blackboard as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay, so we'll be breaking for a few minutes. At 3:30, we'll have another presentation from Sean O'Connor over Loud Cloud.